thanks for being here. I was just thinking for this event, because we shifted really quickly, was we would go through some of the issues with the alternative and then just open it up to like questions. Folks might have questions about what does this mean for GOTV? What does this mean for our strategy overall? What does this mean for communicating the difference between what the council's putting forward and what we're putting forward? You might just have questions generally about social housing or what Montgomery County, Maryland is doing. Like, this is a time to ask any and all questions. We do also on the live stream have the ability to take questions as well. I know I do have a question that came in earlier that is asking about Councilmember Zahalai's $1 billion social housing financing proposal and how that sinks in with what we're doing. So we'll get into that all, but does that sound good with everyone? That's what we'll do here today. So just stepping back again, a lot of people in this room, hey Scott, are responsible for getting Initiative 137 on the ballot. Weekends and evenings and lots of hours went into volunteer time to gather over 38,000 signatures to put Initiative 137 on the ballot. And counter to what the council members claimed today in chambers, the public and the vast majority of the media knew that we were always going to do this initiative in two steps. That Initiative 135 was the vision and the mission, and it was creating the structure to facilitate social housing production in our city, and that we would then follow that up with an initiative to fund it. We were constitutionally prohibited from including funding in the first measure for two reasons. One, PDAs, I will try not to use acronyms, the Public Development Authorities, which is what the Seattle Social Housing Developer is, cannot tax. They do not have taxing authority. So if we were to give it taxing authority, that would be constitutionally illegal. So we couldn't do that.
Due to the single subject rule.
In addition, we also we also have a single subject rule. Unlike Congress, who can, approve arms sales to Israel while also providing clean drinking water. Not sure they do the latter, but hypothetically what I'm saying is you can package anything you want into a bill and then pass it. You can't do that in Washington state. Initiatives have to follow one subject. So to also provide funding the way that we are in I-137 and create a social housing developer would also not be constitutionally legal. So even though Councilmember Nelson and others say that we did a bait and switch, the Seattle Times has said similar things, that is not true. They either weren't paying attention or are willfully misleading voters. I'm going to say the latter. Most of the media outlets know very well this was a two-step process. We told voters that the entire time. So, but we went forward with this. You all got that on the ballot. And we're now in like day 43 of waiting for the council to act on the voter initiative that we got enough signatures for. So Friday is the deadline that the council has to act on a voter initiative for I-137. They have only 3 options before them, even though I'm sure that they have tried to see if it was legal to not even allow I-137 to go on the ballot. That is not legal. You have to allow voters to vote on something that they put on the ballot. So the 3 options before them are and were to pass Initiative 137 as is. Just create it as a law. Tomorrow, enact it. That money starts being collected and given to the social housing developer. We know they're not going to do that. The second option is for them to just place I-137 on the ballot. The third option is for them to put forward an alternative that will go on the ballot alongside Initiative 137. That seems to be the path that they have chosen, and they presented this alternative that I don't know when they worked on it, but it was presented on Monday, and it is going to be voted on Thursday. They couldn't vote on the alternative today at City Council chambers because they didn't give the public 24 hours notice of the vote. So that's why they're doing a special meeting. I believe that they probably would have liked to not do a special meeting and not have any public comment whatsoever on this process. But that's what's in front of us. We, at the end of the day, believe that we will prevail, that our initiative will pass, that voters do not want to siphon off funds from low-income projects to save millionaires and billionaires more money. They want to make sure that we have housing that's affordable to everyone. but this does present new communications challenges. It is likely just minute details. It is likely we will have to print everything new, because instead of being yes on Initiative 137, it will be yes on Proposition 1A. So we will be navigating that and coming up with new communications for that. You might be asking yourself, well, you know, they haven't voted on the alternative yet. Maybe they'll be swayed not to. I want to hold my breath. We are just going to go forward and assume that they will pass this alternative. We are exploring our legal options. Does the alternative actually pass the sniff test of being an alternative? I will say that our lawyer on initial review does not believe that it passes the sniff test of being a true alternative, because if you were to pass Proposition 1A, Initiative 137, and if you were also to pass Proposition 1B, those two could theoretically coexist. You're not providing an alternative to I-137. You're providing a competing measure, but both could go into existence at the same time. Zooming back to the most recent history of the council putting an alternative on, you might remember in 2022, approval voting.
Funded by Sam Beckman-Fried in part.
So ranked choice voting was the council's alternative to approval voting. And if you were to pass approval voting at the ballot and ranked choice voting at the same time, you see those two things couldn't coexist. You can't have ranked choice voting and approval voting on a ballot. It would be I don't even know how you would do that.
It's a three-dimensional ballot.
Yeah, it would be a three-dimensional ballot. You could, though, have these both. So suffice to say, there are some good legal grounds for potentially this violating the same subject. Whether or not we pursue that legal course is another discussion that the steering committee will have and get input from people. It will be a costly legal battle. So I will also say that that will play into decisions, simply because we are a grassroots movement. We are dependent on individuals, and really mostly that. So we will just have to make all of these choices. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we believe we will prevail. And that this is just showing that the council, the chamber, the mayor are just really worried about the success of I-137 at the ballot, and they're going to do whatever they can to deter voters, to muddy the waters, to make a unclear message. So I'm just going to now just shift into the alternative, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but I do just want to flag a couple of concerns and also respond to a couple of misconceptions that the council put in today, and then we can open it up for a couple of questions. So first and foremost, the council's alternative would raid Jumpstart. It would raid the spending plan put aside by Jumpstart when it was passed a year or two ago.
2000, 4 years ago.
2000.
Sorry, 2020, 4 years ago.
2020, 2000. Yeah, so 4 years ago. And that spending plan dictates that money goes to the Equitable Development Initiative, one of our only anti-displacement strategies in the city of Seattle. That it goes to affordable housing. So when I'm saying affordable housing, I'm talking about housing that is for those 60% of the area median income and below. So true low-income housing that needs ongoing subsidies in order to continue paying the bills. Let's just suffice to say, leave it at that. And then,
Jumpstart,
what? Yeah, and then with the Green New Deal and small business, a lot of it was also during the height of the pandemic, making sure that small businesses could keep their doors open. So
the majority of Jumpstart is legislatively set aside for the traditional subsidized housing model,
which is where it needs to stay and where it should stay. However, that is what they would raid. So the city council, we said this earlier, but we'll keep saying it loud and clear, is that the city council would rather raid programs for low-income people than tax millionaires and billionaires a couple dollars more. So that is what's before us. We adamantly oppose the taking of money from Jumpstart for social housing. We adamantly opposed also the idea of taking the housing levy for social housing. We have enough wealth in this city to fund all of these projects over and over again. We do not need to be pitting affordable housing providers against us. We do not need to be pitting climate justice and climate action against social housing. We can have nice things as long as, you know, we bring in the revenue in a progressive nature. So I'll say that, but there are other concerning parts of the alternative. The alternative would only put forward 10 million annually. We are looking through Initiative 137 to provide at minimum 50 million annually. Because why?
The Starbucks CEO, if you looked at his pay package, and the fact that they got to fly him in.
Yeah. Have you been talking?
No.
Oh. Yeah. Say it.
So the tax that Starbucks will probably have to pay under I-137 is roughly over $1 million for the compensation that the Starbucks CEO will have, which is about as much as it will cost to every year fly him from his house in Long Beach or somewhere, California, up to Seattle, assuming he goes once to Seattle and then back home every week. Yeah.
In their private jet.
In their private jet.
Private jet.
Thank you. Yeah, so they are willing to spend just as much on a plane to fly him out here to Seattle as it would cost.
Now, does that include carbon offsets?
No, actually it does not. It's just purely maintenance and operation costs of the jet. Yeah. So.
But they have a green jet that.
Okay. So, anyways.
Coffee grounds. It flies on burnt.
Super.
Leftover coffee.
So we would be providing 50 million annually because we are in a deep housing crisis. We've been in it for decades. We need to be spending the money adequate to actually get us out of the hole. And 50 million wouldn't get us out of our deficit. Let's be honest. But we think it's a more adequate start than $10 million a year. However, before those $10 million would even be available to the social housing developer, they would need to meet multiple requirements. They would need to have their CEO, check, they have a CEO. They would need a CFO, a Chief Financial Officer. They do not have a Chief Financial Officer yet, and financial controls. And financial controls is so wildly vague. I'm sure if we were to go around this room, every one of us would probably have a slightly different version of what a financial control is. So who knows what the definition of that is for the city. One of the reasons that the Seattle social housing developer has not hired a CFO or hired other staff, which is missing in the discussion on city council, is that the money that was set aside for the social housing developer last fall
and required by voters in I-135.
Yes, has not been released to the social housing developer yet. $850,000 that was allocated in the last budget has not made it to the bank account of the social housing developer, and we're 1 week away from starting this year's budget cycle. So, and a PDA cannot run on IOUs. It is racking up debt. The money that it got from our partners that fought for money at the state level has all been spent. Right when they got that money a couple of months ago, they immediately started the search process and the hiring of a CEO and getting those benefits started, and getting a website that's going to launch at the end of this month that has everything on there that you would want to know about the SSHD. So $10 million a year, all of these very restricted bureaucratic measures that would need to be met before they even can apply for the money. Second, and all of these are important, just because I'm going in a certain row, in a certain sequence doesn't mean any are less important, is this would cap the funding at 80% AMI and below, which you know from I-135 and social housing globally, you do not restrict income. Social housing is income blind. And what the council fails to recognize, understand, want to understand, is that cross-subsidization, which is the economic model that allows for social housing to multiply, is eviscerated when you take out that 80 to 120% of the area median income. People at the 50 to 80% area median income cannot cross-subsidize those at the 0 to 30% area median income. You need the middle class to do that. You need working people to do that. You need the educators, the firefighters, the nurses, the bus drivers that are in that 80 to 120, willing and able to subsidize the lower. So doing it at 80% and below, and they're touting this as like, let's do a pilot first. You are not allowing a pilot to even be realized when you are taking away the method of cross-subsidization from the outset.
I'll add they're out of touch with what the needs of most Seattleites are. Most of them spend more time hanging out with the leaders of the Seattle Chamber of Commerce than they do with teachers and nurses and firefighters and electricians and plumbers. They don't understand that you can be a teacher and lose half of your paycheck to your rent, and that people earning 80 to 120% of the area median income are actually rent burdened or struggling. They just are completely divorced from the struggles that most Seattleites have with our housing crisis.
Yeah, and the growing, like we know this term rent burden is when you're paying more than 30% of your income in rent. We know that that is most predominant at the lower income spectrum, but it is still significant at the middle income spectrum, the working class spectrum. So people are every year becoming more and more rent burdened. There was a study that just came out about like 50% of the US population is rent burdened. So this is not going away, and this isn't going to go away by just investing in low income housing. We need both.
And I think I saw this from a House Our Neighbors tweet, but in Seattle, which is a very wealthy city, there's something like 10,000 families in the 80 to 120% area median income range who are rent burdened, who are spending too much on their housing costs, and thus are giving up on other things like healthcare and education and childcare and saving for retirement and other essential needs because their housing costs are so high.
Yep. I think one other thing from the alternative that I'll highlight, and then I'll go into countering some of what the council said today, is another thing. So in Initiative 137, we put in a cap, a 5% administrative cost cap. And that is on, and I'm forgetting the city department that we have taking the money and then also distributing the funds to Seattle Social Housing Developer. The Revenue Forecasting Office. It's the same city department that administers the Jumpstart tax currently. We set a 5% tax on the administration of the social housing payroll tax. And that is at the tune of $2 million, so that, you know, this city department isn't starting to offset their staffing costs onto this tax instead of being able to cover that through the general fund or other means. What the city council did was put the same administrative barrier on what the Seattle Social Housing Developer can receive. So the Seattle Social Housing Developer would only be able to receive annually $500,000 in admin cost coverage. That's the CEO salary. That's the CFO salary. That's any staff salary. That's office space. That's legal support. That's financial modeling. All of it. Imagine a housing developer that only has $500,000 allocated to it for its staffing. There's all these ways that this is being, for lack of a better term, if someone has a suggestion, please do share, but kneecapping social housing developer, the social housing developer and this model from the inside. So those are a couple of like key things that we took away. Resoundingly though, this is taking away from money that is allocated to our most in need, to anti-displacement measures, to low-income housing and shelters. And we need that money there, and we need social housing, and we need I-137. So just a couple of things from what council talked about today is, I mean, as we've said always, if council members want to talk to us and ask us about social housing and why we're doing it and the mechanics of it, we're here for you. So that you know that social housing is not only for those 80 to 120%, as Councilmember Wu maybe believed, but it's actually for those from 0 to 120% of the area median income, as written in I-135, as passed by voters, as discussed since 2022. So Montgomery County, Maryland. Some people have asked us, you know, is anyone in the U.S. do it? It's nice that Europe does it. That's so cool for them. But like, what about the United States? So we remind them two things. One, it's not just a European thing. Singapore does this. Hong Kong, New Zealand started a program. Toronto, Britain, Egypt. This isn't just a European thing. This is internationally, because governments have decided that housing is a public good, not something for profit motive. So the United States is very, very behind, unsurprisingly. But there is a county in our current country that does social housing. They call it mixed income, and they do actually do it through their county housing authority. The Montgomery County, they call it the Housing Opportunities Commission. So this is the equivalent of the King County Housing Authority here. And they have a mixed income portfolio, which, just like what we're putting forward here, is not restricted by what the federal government allows. It is not restricted by the low-income housing tax credit. how many Section 8 vouchers are available year to year, how many project-based vouchers are available year to year, or how much just like Congress is willing to put forward. It also just doesn't have the same restrictions as our current affordable housing providers, in that if you make a couple dollars more, you might lose your housing because now you make too much money to qualify for affordable housing. We know countless vendors from Real Change that aren't able to create savings accounts because they'll lose all of their benefits. We keep people in poverty in our current affordable housing system, and that is not because affordable housing providers want it that way. It is because of rules set down by the federal government. So anyways, Montgomery County, Maryland, 5 to 10 years ago said, well, what if we just spin off and do this other portfolio where we have a more broad income mix and we actually allow cross-subsidization. And what they're finding is not only is it successful, the county government now has set up years ago a revolving loan fund that is just for their Housing Opportunity Commission to use to build these units. But they are actually able to provide more low-income housing a year through this portfolio than they would if they just relied on what the federal government provides annually. So I'll just say that again in a different way. If Montgomery County was, hypothetically, if Montgomery County was just reliant on what the federal government provides and what the county provides, let's pretend that that would only produce 2,000 units. But
keep in mind those federal tax credits are pretty limited overall and capped per state.
Yes, capped per state. They usually go within the first couple months. But I'm seeing some problems in setting up this hypothetical because I've already seen the media spin what we put out in I-135 for guarantees that we've made. So suffice to say, I'll say it again just so I'm not setting up a way for them to come at us, that they're able to provide overall in the federal, in their federal housing program and their mixed income social housing model, they provide more low income housing every year to the county of Montgomery County than they would if they just relied on federal government money. That is what we can do here. So they're doing it, and this is spreading like wildfire across the United States because people are desperate for solutions and don't want to wait on Congress to do anything. So we have Chattanooga, Tennessee, who's looking to create something like Montgomery County. Atlanta has created something. Rhode Island has created different provisions. Hawaii has been working on this. California has been working on this. We've been in conversation with people in Denver, in San Diego. I don't know if I said Chicago, but I'll say Chicago again. It looks like Chicago will actually do what we did and create its own developer and then fund it. So this is not radical. What's radical is to continue allowing people to be unhoused and displaced and priced out of our city. That's what's radical. But I just want to say that Councilmember Moore today claimed that it is done differently in Montgomery County. Unclear at all what that means. She didn't go into any details, and she said one reason is because it has more accountability. Yes, it has accountability. It is a public housing authority, and it has money that is given to it by the county. It's producing units because that's the mission and the purpose of housing developers. The Seattle Social Housing Developer would be no different. It just doesn't have the money to prove concept yet.
The Seattle Social Housing Developer is accountable to its residents. Slightly more than half of its board of directors are actual residents of the housing. And as a PDA, it's also accountable to residents of Seattle who can sue if it fails to comply with what its charter is.
Yep, and yeah, I'll leave it there. And then, so yeah, if Councilmember Moore, and we should press her, she's not going to answer us, but we should press her at the special meeting on Thursday at 2 p.m. at City Hall, where they will vote on this. But what's done differently, I have no idea what she's talking about. Councilmember Nelson, as I alluded to earlier, said that I-135 was an unfunded mandate. That's just a lie. We were very clear about our limitations and that we would follow it up. If anything, they should be patting us on the back for having integrity and following up I-135 with a funding measure, which is what we said we were going to do. But I don't really have any expectations. She also said that the Seattle Social Housing Developer has had a year to ramp up, but does not have any staff with experience. I think she should probably check her facts before she makes claims like that. The new CEO of the Seattle Social Housing Developer, his name is Roberto Jimenez. He comes from California. He's from the Housing Now affordable housing developer. He has decades of affordable housing experience. He oversees like billions of dollars of housing production a year. He has deep experience. Before he was in California, he was in Oregon working on farm worker organizing and farm worker housing. So deep experience. In addition, the board of the SSHD, which we crafted in I-135, includes a nonprofit developer. It includes a public housing finance expert. There is an architect on there as well who knows the housing cycle. And there is also a housing provider that serves marginalized communities. So there is a wealth of knowledge on the governing board for carrying out the duties. It would just be nice if the city upheld its voter mandate in I-135 and provided the in-kind support that it is supposed to. As a reminder, the $850,000 from the city has not been given to the social housing developer. And when asked about office space, which is required in I-135, the mayor told the social housing developer that there's no vacant office space in the city of Seattle for them to utilize. Councilmember Rivera, super unsurprising, says that the alternative won't take away money from anyone. Suresh and I've already debased that. And then she really went hard to try to show how it's social housing is not a proven concept in Seattle. Maybe it's a proven concept in Maryland, maybe these other places, but not in Seattle.
It's like saying raising the minimum wage is not a proven concept. Like, we're doing it because we need to address vast inequality and there are proven solutions in equitable cities around the world.
Yeah. And on that, I'll say, like, this city and you know, governments who don't really want to do anything are just so good at setting up pilot projects, underfunding them, and then saying, oh, look, it didn't work, therefore we move on to the next. And this city for 10 plus years has done that with RV and car safe lots. We always do pilots around RV and car safe lots. I think the last pilot was like 12 spots. 12 spots, and remind you, half of our unhoused neighbors live in their cars. Half of our unhoused neighbors live in their RVs. And so to say that like thousands of people, and you're gonna do a pilot for 12 and like, oh, no, that didn't work. Like that's foolish. That's not good governance. We can see through that. We will not allow that to happen with social housing in I-137. That is why House Our Neighbors, which had started as a coalition under Real Change, is now its own organization. We are here with you all to make sure that we succeed, and we're not going away. So someday people will realize that. So I'm going to stop there. Sorry, that was a lot of talking, but I know that there are lots of questions. So let's just start with any questions that you all might have. As I said, I have a question about Councilmember Zahalai's proposals, but I'll see about people having questions here first. Super, and then we'll go from there.
So I read their alternative proposal, and it's a whole lot of words, and you just spent probably like half an hour doing a pretty good detailed walkthrough of a lot of what's wrong with it. It's going to be something that we have to message against. It's super complicated to explain to voters, like, what are we doing? What is the council doing? Why is what the council is doing bad and in bad faith? Why should you vote for 1A and vote for no on 1B? Like, what's our, like, I get that this is going to evolve and we have to go back to the printer and get things printed and we need time to actually do that, but attention is hot right now. Everybody's talking about it because the council meetings are happening right now and this is happening. So what's our, what's our elevator pitch? Working elevator pitch for how should we be messaging this?
With an alternative on the ballot?
I think it's pretty simple, right? Alternative 1B from the City Council. Alternative 1B from the City Council defunds existing affordable housing providers to then hamstring and underfund the Seattle social housing developer. It's very simple. We are a very wealthy city. Proposition 1A taxes the wealthy businesses to provide robust funding for a new form of cross-class, resident-led social housing.
Take an online question? There's some questions online.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is, like, we also, after the election, because there's a lot of overlap between the elections right now and like our mission and our base, and we want to make sure that the elections go in specific ways. So after that, we'll be launching our field campaign and getting out there. So just also to your question, we want to be testing things out in the field. So when you're out there talking to your friends and family, just start testing out messaging with them and what works. a lot of how House Our Neighbors comes up with our messaging strategy are people being out in the field talking to regular people and seeing what resonates. So we have a communications committee that folks are super welcome to join. Who's here in the communications committee? Yeah, so like that, welcome to join. That's where we workshop a lot of our talking points and strategy and comms. So great question. It's an evolving process, but we just know that we need to try to fight against this alternative, and then after Thursday, set our sights on getting out the vote. Online question?
Sure. We have a question. Excuse me. We have a question from Amar. He's there asking, how long does it take the courts to look into the matter if that was to be legally challenged?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. All I know is our lawyer today said in a message that should we want to go forward, we have time. I don't know if we were to, and again, like we're sharing part of the legal analysis. Unlike the council who kept saying they couldn't talk about stuff because it was attorney-client privilege, like technically what I'm telling you is attorney-client privilege, but I'm the client, so I get to choose to share this information with you. So I'm sharing that with you, and our lawyer also said today that like we have time. I don't know if this would delay a February ballot. Would taking legal recourse push us back onto a later ballot so that could be solved ahead of time? I don't know is the answer. I don't want to tell you something that's not accurate, but we would have a couple of months. I don't know if they would act quickly. All I know is that we may go into this should we decide to go forward, even though we might have the strongest legal case. At the end of the day, their politics also, surprise, plays a role in our judiciary system. So even though we might have a really strong legal case, that doesn't mean at the end of the day that maybe politics or something else might not prevail.
Oh yeah, for whatever.
Go ahead. Yeah, let's go to.
Okay. I just have a question about the way the ballot would be structured, because you said that one of the arguments the lawyer gave is that you would be given a choice that these two choices could exist simultaneously. But my experience in the past with these sorts of situations where a council will give voters two options is they'll say do you want to vote yes on this, and then which one do you want? Which doesn't seem like that would end up being a problem for this. So I'm just curious if you could explain that.
Yes.
If you understand my question at all.
I do, and I think it's two parts. If you take just what the ballot will look like, and then I'll talk about the other part.
So here's, I think, what the ballot will look like. There'll be two questions. Number one, do you want to fund the Seattle social housing developer, a public development authority? Yes or no? The second question will be, regardless of how you answered on number one, how would you prefer to fund it? 1A, an excess compensation payroll tax anytime a business pays someone more than $1 million a year in Seattle. Or number two, or 1B, take some existing money from the existing payroll expense tax and set aside $10 million of it to the Seattle social housing developer. But they have to apply for it, and they have to go through some other hoops and hurdles. And they can only use that money to serve families earning less than 80% of the area median income. So that's what people will see, two options on the ballot.
And this is a ballot that will also have two education levies. They're both levies?
I believe so.
Don't quote us on that. There will be an education levy and then an education something else. So there will be, and also I believe we know that our friends in Raise the Wage Burien will more than likely also be on the February ballot, and then also Kent for districts just filed their initiative too, so they may be on the February ballot as well. So it will be multiple things on the ballot. But what you're getting at too with your question is well, how would they both be able to coexist? Is that your question because of this? And that's not where it is. It's the question of the council for that third option we talked about all the way back. Before, what are its options with Initiative 137? It can put on an alternative. That alternative needs to be the same subject. The legal argument is that this is not same subject and it's not an alternative because both could coexist. You're not providing something where you can't have one without the other. Whereas like my example with ranked choice voting and approval voting, you can't have two different ways of having people vote on their ballot. You need just one.
And so that's a requirement in order for it to be like.
In order for it to be deemed an appropriate, adequate, viable alternative under the same subject provision, yes. Yes. But again, that is going to be a judicial argument versus at the ballot. Yeah. I saw
I
Anna.
actually have a question.
Mhm.
This is
We need either better volume on that microphone, or Tiffany and I need to repeat that the question.
Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced that the audio is routing into the computer via these
Okay.
microphones.
Okay.
So if you can repeat the question, yeah, I think that
Okay.
So I think I'm maybe jumping ahead here. However, I'm trying to understand, like, so let's say it passes, right? Like, my question about, how I understood it was, we would buy, I don't know if it's the government or whomever would buy like abandoned houses or have the opportunity to build on this very small square footage of land within the Seattle area. So I wanted to know, one, who is in charge of buying that, and then two, if like zoning laws and permits and land use things will pose a huge problem for once it passes. I'd like to know.
Yes, great.
Like, I was
So
just,
2 questions, right? One is, if
if I understand.
Proposition 1A, I-137 passes, or even the alternative, who's actually doing the buying and the building
Yeah.
of houses? And then part 2 is, do all of the things that make it really difficult and expensive to build housing, like our zoning laws, will those be barriers to the Seattle social housing developer?
Yeah. Oh, you're doing the repeating of the question.
Yeah.
Do you want to take the first part and
Sure,
then I'll get
yeah.
into the second?
So the Seattle social housing developer would be doing the buying or constructing of buildings. It is like a company. It's a public development authority, which is like if a government agency and a nonprofit had a baby. It's not quite a government. It's not quite part of our government, and it's not quite a fully independent nonprofit. But it's a company. It has a board of directors, and in this case, 7 out of the 13 members of the board are residents of the housing. And that board hires a CEO, and the CEO is the person who hires a team to decide what are we going to buy or build, how much money are we going to spend, where is it going to be, what land are we going to acquire, and things like that.
Yep. And then for the second part, you're exactly right. That's why House Our Neighbors is still part of the Complete Communities Coalition, who are pushing for the most bold, comprehensive plan changes. So making sure that we don't continue our exclusionary zoning. We don't continue like the redlining in our history, that we open up these single family neighborhoods, which are exclusively for wealth building for white families, to allow for multifamily housing. So zoning, land use changes, getting rid of onerous design review, permitting, all of those go together to create a social housing developer and a social housing ecosystem where like we can flourish. I mean, that's, if you look at countries around the world, they have all of these things together because they realize like you can have this one lever that's really outstanding, but if you have this other lever where like you only have like 7 blocks of your city where you can do multifamily, this might be the most amazing program, but only 7 blocks of the city are able to capitalize on that. So the comprehensive plan is something really important to follow the Complete Communities Coalition. I keep pointing at Scott just because Scott's with Tech for Housing and on the steering committee of the Complete Communities Coalition. That process is going to be kicking off next year, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, we'll get an announcement, but like the organizing at the legislative level.
Yeah, October we're getting new zoning map.
October, getting new zoning map.
You want to give an update on zoning?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
You got to just, we're talking
And
about.
get on the camera.
Yeah, so they just announced we're getting draft zoning maps in October, mostly for kind of the neighborhoods. They're potentially kind of dragging it out for our like urban centers where we might get more mid-rise and high-rise type buildings, but that will go to City Council in December with a vote in January to on the implementation. So the mayor will have his final proposal in December. City council can amend that up to the maximum of what was included in the environmental impact study. So there's some constraints on what council can do, but they can definitely push it a little bit further depending on what the mayor proposes.
Yep. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for letting us call you up here.
Thank you.
We have an online question.
Okay.
This is from Travis. Travis says, sorry if you already answered this, but do you know what the nebulous, quote, legal issues, unquote, around I-137, Bob Kettle, and others have mentioned?
Don't. They did not decide to disclose their attorney-client privilege as the client. I like what Suresh says, like, aren't the people of Seattle the client? Like, shouldn't we know what these things are?
Yeah.
So no, we don't know, but I will say that we did know of potential legal risks because all initiatives carry legal risk. So we knew about some of them, but felt very confident, and we went forward anyways because we are determined for this model to work, to have the money necessary to get started. And if for some reason we fail, guess what? We'll be back. So
I want to note, like, House Our Neighbors has done its research. It's been working on this for many years, right? You don't send hundreds of volunteers out into the rain to collect signatures for a voter initiative without having paid a lawyer to write an initiative that would withstand legal scrutiny and lawsuits. You don't spend the contributions that people have made to the House Our Neighbors campaign without doing your due diligence. And yes, with any voter initiative, there are legal risks, and we're trying to do something new here. But yeah, I think Councilmember Kettle's concerns are disingenuous. If he truly believed that there were legal risks to the city to putting this on the ballot and having it passed, he would have talked about those openly, and he would have just voted to put it on the ballot and let it get sued off the ballot, which has happened very recently. A voter initiative, Compassion Seattle, was thrown off the ballot within, I think, a few weeks of the city council putting it on the ballot. I think he and his colleagues, who are all elected with significant financial support from big businesses, were looking for ways to stop this initiative because it rolls back the partly the billions of dollars in tax breaks we give to big businesses here operating in a city with a deeply regressive tax system.
and also claiming legal reasons, as I'll remind you, is the reason that we're not on the November ballot.
Yeah.
We had ample time to be on the November ballot, and they punted it the day of, even though the day before at council briefing, no one raised legal issues, no one raised legal concerns, no one said they needed more questions. They were set to vote on it. They limited public comment on soda and soap under the auspice of needing time to pass I-137 by the 4:30 deadline set by King County elections. They knew going into that they were lying to the public. They knew they were limiting public comment, trying to pit, again, I-137 against other community important needs. And I think that council meeting got shut down for a bit, but yeah, so we also weren't on the November ballot because of that. I saw Kat and then Laura and then
Go ahead.
Scott.
Oh, I don't have anything.
Oh,
So I actually have a couple questions. The first one was building on your question about zoning and reducing bureaucracy and red tape.
building on the question of zoning,
Yeah,
reducing
building on
red tape. Yep.
Right, like building on her question about how that would work, because I was curious, the Connected Communities legislation was voted down by council. Is this even on?
Yes, the Councilmember I'll repeat back. Councilmember Morales' Connected Communities pilot was voted down by the council.
Correct. And that contained a lot of the elements that we're talking about when it comes to implementation of like reducing red tape and loosening zoning laws, changing the height of ceilings, reducing parking spaces,
Yes.
putting childcare centers on the, so is that gonna be a roadblock for implementation? Like, will the council be a roadblock there if they already voted down basically those elements?
Yeah. Let me just summarize your question back to you, just for the listeners. So yes, the question is around how the city council already voted down Councilmember Morales's Connected Communities pilot. That was a few months ago. The Connected Communities pilot would have allowed for height bonuses, density bonuses for affordable and social housing, would have allowed for just like more density overall, allowing for childcare centers and community spaces on the bottom, loosening some zoning, some restrictions, maybe design review too, I don't remember. But yeah, that got voted down for, reasons.
Like 7-2 or something?
Yeah, so yes, that would have been incredibly helpful. We were very supportive of that. It would have also given those bonuses to the social housing developer where, all of the laws in the city right now don't also for affordable housing apply to social housing. So we need to make sure that that happens. But yes, that was voted down. Yes, that has massive implications. Yes, that shows that even though land use is wonky and maybe boring and dry, that we all have a vested interest in getting involved in the comprehensive plan process so that we don't continue having neighborhoods like Laurelhurst and Magnolia that are gated off from the rest of the community, where we have schools closing potentially across our city. And when Fred Podesta was asked about the disparity between kids being born in Seattle, but then when they go to needing to enter kindergarten, there's a drop-off. Where do those people go? And the answer from Fred Podesta is, a lot of this is due to the housing crisis, the housing instability, housing costs. Families are moving out of the city when their kids enter school because we do not provide family-sized units that are affordable to families to be able to live and thrive in the city of Seattle. So
the number of children living in King County decreased this past year.
So yes, we are actively creating all of these conditions to even have the absurd discussion about potential school closures. So yes, all of these are interconnected. While we don't have the friendliest council for a lot of our shared interests here, we have elections coming up. We also have big elections coming up in 2025. The mayor will be up for re-election, both citywide seats, and also just like organizing with people in this room and other places, like getting involved in local organizations and pushing citizens initiatives if you can. I mean, there's a reason we went the initiative route. You can't change zoning, all of zoning through an initiative from what we understand. So yes, I hope that answers your question.
Actually, I had another question.
Yeah.
The Stranger article is great that just came out this afternoon, and you'll be happy to know Councilmember Morales basically quoted you word for word today in chambers, and everybody clapped. So, but I was curious about what former city attorney Pete Holmes said about the council's actions and delays constituting voter suppression. Like, is that a totally different legal avenue that you guys can pursue?
I'll repeat it first. I'm going to repeat it first. So, talking about the Stranger article that dropped this afternoon, former attorney general? Former city attorney Pete Holmes is quoted in there talking about how this council potentially has engaged in voter suppression by keeping I-137 off the November ballot, a higher turnout election versus February, a lower turnout election. That's the question.
Yeah. So when you take a look at the most recent city council election that we had, I think 5 out of the 7 elections were won by candidates who said publicly their policy position is we should not enact any new progressive revenue sources. And the only progressive revenue stream the city has is taxing wealthy corporations when they distribute large amounts of wealth to their employees, payroll taxes. And all 5 of those candidates were backed by hundreds of thousands of dollars from business executives and other wealthy people. It's very clear that they had a preconceived notion that I-137 should be stopped or limited in whatever way they could. And one of the best ways they could do that is by fabricating or exaggerating legal concerns about it to then delay action on it so it would not appear on the November ballot. Does anyone here know why they did not want I-137 to be on the November ballot, even if they had an alternative ready?
Oh, it's like the voters. It's like a much more progressive.
Yep.
mix of
So
voters.
one of the folks in the audience pointed out. So in our most recent city council election, which was in a low turnout, odd numbered year, I think voter turnout was something like 37%, 38%. Seattle in a presidential election year, which is this November, voter turnout is something like 83%, 84%. And it's the progressive voters who are turning out at 2 to 3 times higher rates in a presidential general election. So it is likely what they were trying to do is deliberately, what Pete Holmes is alluding to, is deliberately stall so that I-137 would be on a very low turnout ballot. It's mostly older, wealthy homeowners like me who vote in those February elections, and fewer people who understand just how expensive it is to live in the city. So yeah, I think Pete Holmes is correct. I think he was also alluding to certain things like the city charter required the city council to treat acting on this voter initiative as their highest priority work, except for public safety and appropriations. Emergencies. And that's not really the case. Every council meeting they've had since I-137 qualified for the ballot, they've kind of said, hey, let's put this off. We've got some legal concerns.
And actively working on multiple pieces of other legislation, soda and soap.
Yeah, and actively working on other legislation while they were working through back channels with the Chamber of Commerce on an alternative. And the Chamber of Commerce did some polling. Some of you may have received that text polling on an alternative that they would have preferred. It would have been a property tax, an increase to our property taxes to fund not the social housing developer, but just the city's Office of Housing. And for various legal reasons, they realized that would not work. And then at the last minute, and also I'm sure the polling was terrible, who's going to vote to increase their property taxes when the alternative is tax the rich? And that's why they're scrambling at this last minute for this kind of haphazard, confused alternative that does its best to try and siphon off votes from I-137.
Yes, Scott, I have this question, and then we'll take like 1 or 2 more, and then wrap up.
So some critics might be concerned that taxing big businesses might send them, fleeing off to other parts of the county or the country. But Amazon just announced their 5-day return to office policy. Do you take that as a huge vote of confidence that Amazon believes in Seattle and they're not afraid to pay any social housing tax?
So the question was, that some opponents would say that by targeting the businesses, the wealthiest, by targeting businesses, that could cause some of them to flee, to move to Bellevue, move to Renton, move elsewhere. That's a more favorable business climate. But Amazon just announced a new return to work policy starting in January, mandating people to be in the office 5 days a week. Is that a vote of confidence of Amazon signaling in the cities? Did I get that last part right? Yeah. So yes, saw that, have heard that opposition point. I sure hope it is. Like, we want to build a city where business is booming, but you can't have business booming if people can't afford to pay for your things. And if our whole notion of business booming is forcing workers to go to an office to spend their hard-earned dollars on lunch, I think that we need a new plan for how we're going to revitalize downtown Seattle. I think we need a new plan for how we're going to revitalize the business interests in our area. We need to be thinking much broader than that. And then what I'll say for if businesses leave, we don't know what businesses are going to do. We don't have a crystal ball. We know that they threaten these things. We know that they threaten capital flight. But at the end of the day, we need to stop prioritizing the greed of a few over the needs of the many. We need housing for all Seattleites, and we need to pay for it in a progressive way. And the greed of a few shouldn't be holding us back from social progress.
I want to add something, which is, we do know what they will do because there is an existing payroll tax, Jumpstart. and it passed in 2020. And it was projected to bring in about 220 million in its first year, and every year it has brought in more revenue. Next year, I think it's projected to bring in more than $400 million. We have the fact check against the Chamber of Commerce talking point right in front of us. We have the data. Even though tech companies can go move jobs to Bellevue or some other barren suburban wasteland, they are choosing to spend more money compensating highly skilled, highly paid people in Seattle. They have the choice today to evade an existing payroll tax, and they're choosing to spend more money here. It is absolutely false. We have the data in front of us, at least 3 years of Jumpstart, that proves that that's wrong.
At least one council member today cited that Jumpstart has outperformed.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess that's,
Yep.
was Tammy Morales?
No.
Oh, wow.
It was.
I think it's Rivera or Nelson.
One of the-
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the council members even said how Jumpstart is outperforming. So, yes, exactly. I'll go to this audience question from earlier about Councilmember Zahalai's financing. So, if you haven't seen at the King County Council, Councilmember Girmay Zahalai has put forward an idea for a task force or a work group to create a billion with a B, $1 billion housing financing bond, which is incredible news. Like this is would be a monumental investment in. He's calling it workforce housing. We call it social housing. You can call it whatever you want, just as long as you are also serving this broad income mix. And Councilmember Zahalai's proposal would allow for the housing at the 80 to 120% AMI, which we also prioritize in the Seattle Social Housing Developer. I do want to take the opportunity to clear up like one misconception that's out there. I-135, the Seattle Social Housing Developer, prioritizes incomes to 120, but if you make 125, that doesn't mean you're going to be kicked out of the housing. You might just pay a little bit more in rent, because we are hoping that people over the lifetime of their career make more money. That shouldn't come at the expense of their housing, their home, their community. So just want to say, like, while the priority is like the 80 to 120, that doesn't mean that there might not be higher income units to make the building pencil so that we can provide deeper affordability. So just something I want to clarify there. But Councilmember Zahalai's is super exciting. Just want to be clear that he's proposing like a fund of money for people to be able to draw on King County Housing Authority and public developers. Where what we've created here is an actual developer with the mandate to provide social housing, workforce housing. They work very complementary to each other. So this would allow for another financing tool. You all probably know about Amazon's equity funds that they've been investing into affordable housing projects across our region. And while that is really, really important, like let's imagine for a moment if the public sector actually did what Amazon is doing and the profits from those low interest loans went back into building more housing for the public sector. That's essentially what we're looking at there. So we definitely support it. We've been in conversation with Councilmember Zahalai, have gotten written assurance that there will be an amendment being brought forward that would include explicitly the Seattle Social Housing Developer as being eligible for this financing. That will still go through, a stakeholder process, but we are really confident and excited that, a council is thinking boldly in our region.
I apologize. With that one, where's that $1 million coming from?
It would be on a bond. The county would be taking on debt. But the reason that, because counties can do that, governments can do that, the Seattle Social Housing Developer can also take out bonds. It's going to take a couple years for the social housing developer to not be a risky investment on the bond market. So show proof of concept, show the ability to have the revenue to pay off the 10, 20, 30-year bond. So that's why also we need I-137 and a sufficient amount of money to show that. But the county can bond right now on its own debt. It's actually has the ability to bond a lot more right now, and they're not utilizing it. So it sounds like Councilmember Zahalai is like, let's use this for our housing crisis. Yeah. Any other questions, even if it's not like directly related to what we just talked about? Yeah.
You mentioned the communications working group or committee. What are other ways people can get involved over the next several months?
That's a great last question,
yeah.
Eric. Yes, great. Yeah, so how to get involved? So first and foremost, I would say go to the letsbuildsocialhousing.org website and sign up to volunteer. We will be doing a lot of voter education here shortly, especially if we have this alternative. We are, even though House Our Neighbors is an organization, we still really operate like a coalition. And we did this for Initiative 135, and we did it all the way back in 2021 when we opposed Compassion Seattle, when we opposed Charter Amendment 29. We operate in work groups and committees. So we have a communications committee, we have an outreach committee, we have a field committee, and sometimes we have a fundraising committee. Nashin's going to get that started soon. So we have those committees, and that's where a lot of like that grassroots from the bottom up to like the staff happens, and where we make our decisions. We also have a steering committee that makes most of the strategic decisions for the initiative. Also, though, on Thursday, really importantly, at 2 o'clock at City Hall, I recognize that's square in the middle of the day, but calling in works as well. At 2 o'clock on Thursday, the council is holding its special meeting on the alternative to I-137. This is the first opportunity the public will have to like comment on the alternative in full. It was just introduced today. I doubt we will be given sufficient time for the public to talk about it. We are hoping that our affordable housing developer partners show up to oppose the rating of Jumpstart. We hope that we have folks from the Green New Deal that are showing up opposed to the rating of the Jumpstart tax. Same with the Equitable Development Initiative. We've already seen earlier this year Councilmember Rivera try to eliminate that program by freezing the funds in front of community right now. So these are huge existential threats. This is all tied into also making sure that Jumpstart isn't rated in the budget that's coming up here in the fall. Like there's just so many opportunities the council has to take money away from these other really important tasks. So get involved with us, follow our social media, come to the council meeting. We will be drafting some public comment for people if they want, just so that we can go through like countering all of the points that council has put out, and then countering some of the alternative if folks want that. We will have some stuff provided just so we're able to cover our points in our 1 minute. I'm going to assume that we have.
And
so.
if you, I'm looking in the camera there, if you are a highly compensated tech worker, you can go to the letsbuildsocialhousing.org website and you can donate, because a legal fight to get this alternative thrown off the ballot should the campaign decide to pursue it, will be expensive. Also, it is extraordinarily expensive to print flyers that say vote for Proposition 1A instead of Proposition 1B. If I-137 were on the ballot on its own, the campaign could do nothing. People will read it and be like, yes, of course, we need this. So yeah, incredibly important. If you are privileged, please, letsbuildsocialhousing.org and click the donate button. Every dollar counts.
Yes, thank you very much. And yeah, we will be fighting a really well-resourced opposition. We did not have that for I-135. So thank you, Suresh, our tech sibling, for plugging that. And yeah, thank you all for being here. Follow us up. We will do another sort of live
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Oh, sorry. Anyways, thank you for being here. If you have more questions, just follow up with us and we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you.